Good morning and afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Welcome to our presentation today, Migration Transformation Bootcamp for Project Online. My name is Heather Champeau and I'm a Strategic Account Specialist here at Wickersoft. I'm also joined on today's call by Jose Levy, a strategic partner with FluentPro, who works with us very closely on our Microsoft project migrations. Before we get started, we have a few quick logistics to go over with you. First off, due to the large audience, we'll not be able to open the lineup today. However, please feel free to leverage the chat module within your GoToWebinar panel to ask your questions. We will be monitoring the chat and question panel throughout today's presentation. You can also feel free to email me directly, and I'll be happy to answer your questions as well. I'll be including my contact information at the end of the webinar. That being said, all lines will be muted throughout the presentation. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no worries. We'll be distributing the recording of today's presentation to all registrants following the webinar. So with that, let's get started. A lot of project management today is being driven by the movement of digital transformation. As you can see here through a PricewaterhouseCoopers CEO survey, 86% of CEOs consider digital transformation their #1 priority. And then also, obviously, to execute on that vision successfully. In fact, 84% have a high chance of failure. Digital transformation really occurs through the execution of projects and programs in a large scale that touches all parts of the organization, making today's topic a very familiar one to many. At its most basic, the success of projects comes down to two things. One, did it advance the company's business goals? For instance, expanding into markets, maybe new segments. And two, was it successfully executed to meet the specific project goals, like delivering the expected scope or budget? Is it on time, for example? Findings from the Project Management Institute suggest that companies struggle with both, meaning that the return on the large investments in project doesn't return the full value. According to them, only 43% of companies experience high alignment between projects and strategy. Said another way, for example, projects at 57% of companies do not advance the overall strategy at all. Also, only 62% of projects meet their specific goals. So when you put these together, as depicted by the quadrant, there's significant room for improvement. Digital transformation and moving workloads online make up a big portion of that untapped potential. Microsoft has really had a strong decade of innovation. We've gone from the desktop Microsoft Project through making it more part of the Microsoft Office SharePoint integration, then to providing and giving you a consolidated PPM solution with Project Server, and now moving PPM into the cloud originally in 2013. But the advances after that, such as adding more and more capabilities, integrations, functionality, and even accessibility through the cloud, you can see the pace of delivery of new features and functions is really accelerating. And it's turned out to meet the demands more quickly as opposed to the past, where a new server release with new capabilities would come out maybe every 3 years on average. So now we have continuous delivery in the cloud. We're getting access to current features and functions just as the market demands. Since Microsoft PPM became a SaaS offering, they've accelerated their timelines. Innovative features are now on a much more rapid schedule, aligning to the release schedule, of course, of other Microsoft solutions as well. This picture shows just a few examples of the capabilities that have shipped, with many more in the pipeline, really now more than ever. In fact, if you didn't catch our webinar last week on what's new with Project, make sure you navigate to our website and watch the recording. Many new exciting things are on the horizon for Microsoft, which includes a whole new product vision for the future of projects. So there's a lot of exciting things going on. One benefit of moving online is the lower cost of ownership. If we look at the total cost of ownership, the on-premise model has a lot of hidden costs. Cloud computing offers a predictable, lower cost model. So you pay as you go, which gives you much lower risk. There's no hardware to maintain, which allows IT to focus on strategic initiatives or more important initiatives. You no longer have to wait for IT to do something. So that can also be a benefit. And you're now able to constantly evolve your solutions versus waiting for upgrades. The Yankee Group has documented the cost advantages of cloud computing and shown a 46% lower TCO overall, which can be a significant cost cut for many organizations. If we look at the rest of the benefits you'll receive with migrating your environment to the cloud, we already know that your project environments will be ever changing, right? Moving to the cloud will ensure that you're able to make decisions quickly in an environment that is always up to date with the latest technology. I know we've all experienced it. How many times have you managed an entire project for a software update just to find out 2 weeks later that another patch is needed? Environments change all the time, period. An online PPM system can help you respond quickly and favorably to those changes, making your organization more agile. Scalability as well. There are many ways online PPM can scale, adjusting user count, for example, adding functionality that will be built on the latest technology. Again, how many times have you added customization and then heard that your system is no longer supported because you built it on a previous version that's now out of date? Connecting various user groups as the system is leveraged by more and more teams as well. And then scaling is just a faster, easier process online. Lower cost of ownership in general. We just talked about that one on the previous slide. Also, being online can allow for better governance and control. Adding process, workflows, and other structure to your environment is simple and instant. So changes will affect users across the board right away. As we develop new challenges with everyday work, there's always an urgency to resolve the issues right away. A digital or online environment allows you to implement solutions quickly while there's good momentum, right? Oftentimes, taking action now keeps the momentum across teams going and delivers much faster results. Instead of worrying about infrastructure, software updates, and your PPM environment in general, you can focus on delivering projects and business value while your environment is automatically updated in the background without impacting your resources or your timelines that are already going on within. There's also many ways to collaborate, and as we all know, the more options we have, the more collaboration takes place. Online team members have many more options for collaborating, including online comments, social streams, groups, Yammer, etc. The more people connect, the more productive we tend to be. Also, flexibility is key. Project Online is available on any of your devices, not just on your desktop. It can be accessed from anywhere, so you can work wherever and whenever you choose. Being online also provides access to other apps, allowing you to add other functionality to your environment without the need for development or a separate system altogether. Same goes into play with integrations. And lastly, competitive advantage. You never have to worry about whether or not you're staying on top of the competition. You can ensure that you will always be using the latest, newest, most cutting-edge technology. So with that, let's move on to some migration details. Jose, I will hand it over to you. There you go.
Thank you, Heather. And thanks everyone for joining us. So what we want to talk for the next few minutes is really about the important step of migrating from your on-premise project server to project online. It is an important step in the evolution of your organizational PPM capability, and it demands planning and careful planning and attention. So we're going to walk through what those elements are so that you can have a successful experience in going to project online. As part of FluentPro, we've been involved and also together with our partner Wickersoft, in a number of migrations. The tools that we're going to talk about and the approach that we're going to present here have been used in over 500 migrations from project server to project online, and also from other non-PPM systems. If we collect all that experience for the last year specifically, there's some trends that we want to highlight here, and we're going to go through a case study, and then we'll give you some very specific guidance on doing your migration. This is a good time to be involved in a project online migration because, like I said, there's a large number that have already occurred, and also project online has gotten better as a platform. But generally, consider your migration as you're moving. You're moving from one environment to the other. So you really want to understand what is in your current project server environment, which means that the more you prepare and clean up your existing data before you do the migration, the higher probability of success that you're going to have. More recently, we've been involved in large migrations that have master projects. So master projects right now, for instance, this is a technical point. They will migrate without status managers and project owners, which means that you have to actually do that manually. It's just another step that you have to plan for as part of the migration exercise. Generally, if you have an environment with a large set of resources, and I would say greater than 1,000, there's actually specific steps for doing account mapping for those resources, and that's why, as part of the migration planning and orientation, you want to take into account, the time that it's going to take to actually make that happen. Calendar exceptions is also, something that you want to make sure are equivalent between source and target. Otherwise, when you migrate the schedules, you're going to have discrepancies. And, with very large project server instances going to the cloud, the constraint on the number of project sites per site collection has become more of an issue. So you want to make sure that you take into account how are you going to either archive or create other site collections that will have those project sites tied to the original PWA where the projects are going to be hosted. So really the bottom line is that you really should take time to assess the data to be migrated. It doesn't have to be a never-ending exercise, but you want to understand what it is that you're going to be migrating, the quality of your data, and we'll talk about that also in a minute. Understand the technical boundaries of Project Online for your migration. There's a lot of details involved in terms of what is supported and what not supported, and really invest in pre-planning and a migration strategy that can be delivered by Wickersoft and FluentPro. So I would say that in terms of the most recent migrations, those are things that you want to take into account. In terms of sizing, we perform migrations for all sizes of project server instances. Going into it, I know it's shown there 1,500 or 2,000 projects. We've actually gone into 6,000 projects, 10,000 projects. So what all of these experiences lead us is that really the amount of data is directly related to the amount of time the migration will take. The API and Project Online only allow a certain amount of data to be uploaded, and we'll talk about those restrictions in a second. So you want to plan for the sizing that you're going to be taking to Project Online. The quality of data is directly related to the risk and complexity. So if you have a lot of master projects, very large projects, they're going to take longer. If you have a lot of older projects that you're going to be migrating, we generally don't recommend that you take archive projects into Project Online, although you can. But if you don't know the quality of that data, and I'm talking about quality of the project plans itself, the MPP files, that could impact the migration timeline. In the end, migration is complex because of all the moving parts. You have a configuration, you have project plans, you have SharePoint sites, you have resources. So all of that needs to go in sequence and be executed, migrated correctly in order for it to for you not to encounter any issues. And all that again leads to having a sound migration strategy to make sure you have data integrity. In other words, in a verification step that we'll talk about in a minute, you actually compare what's in source and what's in target to make sure that what went to target is exactly the same. So I'm going to review a case study of migration that went well. It was actually a migration from Project Server 2013 to Project Online. The significance was the time constraint. The customer had to actually decommission on-premise infrastructure, so there were consequences from a financial and contractual standpoint, security standpoint, that were going to impact if this didn't happen on time. So, we were engaged in order to perform the migration under these conditions. One option which we recommend is do a first release with active projects only. If you have to bring over closed and archive projects and you can't just put them off in a store, that can be done. And in this case, again, because of the time constraint, we recommended that subsequent releases included those closed and archive projects. So really, the point on that on the releases is to focus on active projects, projects that are in execution or have been approved to be executed, and really not on closed and archive projects as part of that initial release. In this case, we spent a lot of upfront time planning prior to even beginning the migration. Resources were geographically distributed, but everybody had a defined role. There was a strong project manager on both sides, on the customer and on our side. In this case, the customer had a lot of custom lists and libraries in SharePoint, and those were able to be migrated. But again, we took them into account early on and in our test migrations in order to see if there was going to be any impact on the production migration. And then finally, during the migration, there was a new feature introduced for reporting in terms of having time phase data. So that impacted the approach in terms of how we migrated projects. So you have to take that into account also, and figure workarounds in order to avoid delays in your migration project plan. The migration was successful, and I think all the upfront planning really helped. And the customer followed a very disciplined approach, what we recommended. So the execution went really well. In this case, there was a full test migration of all projects. Sometimes you might not have the time to do that, but we recommend that you actually do that full test migration, because otherwise we have cases where that has not occurred, and then you're almost in cutover in a production migration, and you never tested a set of projects, and you have to start all over because there were data corrupt issues with the project plan. So bottom line is, do a full test migration, take that luxury and make that happen. You have to follow the sequence very carefully for troubleshooting. Otherwise, you have to start over, and that's happened several times where folks didn't really follow the guidelines, and then they literally had to start over in their migration. In this case, the customer also took time to do full UAT of the configuration and Project Online and of all the projects, to make sure that everything was consistent with the way that was in the source Project Server. And in this case, AD Sync was being used. You don't have to use it, but we made sure that it was set up prior to the resource load to make sure that all users were in AD prior to the migration. So another important step if you're going to be using AD. And so in that particular case, we were talking about 2013. You can also migrate from Project Server or from a different tenant. By the way, we have some customers that have changed tenants, so you can do a Project Online to Project Online migration. With Project Server 2019, that will also be a supported scenario. in case anybody is interested in doing that. But in this case, we're talking about cloud, where all the value is. So all migrations are from on-prem to project online. Talked about how you do an assessment prior to even beginning discussions about doing a migration. It's really knowing your data and understanding what's in the source on-premise project server. We have the 4 main categories of content that we evaluate, which is how many resources, how many users. It could be that you have a large set of resources but not a current set of existing users. So you want to understand that. How many active users you currently have that are going to be migrating. That's important when you actually do that account mapping that I talked about, which is important prior to actually doing any of the project migration. Projects, obviously, we're talking about projects in project server going to project online, and the actual MPP files. What is their number? How many are active? How many templates do you have? Do you have any masters, subs, or even projects with cross-project links? The issue with projects occurs mostly with dated projects that were not updated or were not closed correctly, and then there could be data corruption issues. Sometimes those projects might have issues because they went through an upgrade, an in-place upgrade between Project Server 2010 to Project Server 2013, and again, they weren't, during those upgrades for on-prem, they weren't cleaned up. So you might be carrying project plans that have that are corrupted or have issues. So you want to make sure that you identify those, figure which ones might potentially give you problems. Because when you migrate projects, if you have to troubleshoot corrupt projects, during the migration, you're essentially stopping the migration. So make sure that you address those. Project sites, same requirement for understanding what's within the project sites. Here the issue is there's a lot of customization sometimes that the project sites will undergo. Historically, you might have code, you might have custom web parts, and you have to identify those because those are not supported in Project Online. There's workarounds if you want to replace those capabilities, but you can't take really what you did on-prem in a project site in terms of customizations and just put them directly into Project Online. So having an idea of those customizations is really important. In terms of the configuration, I would say that that's probably the easiest to take over into Project Online. The only caveat there are workflows. If it's a workflow created prior to Project Server 2013, the framework was different, so you really can't migrate. They have to be rebuilt. So in that case, for those that are still on Project Server 2010, that's one caveat. The rest of the configuration can be taken over. There are a couple of limitations with respect to strategy, but in most cases, they can be overcome. And I would say that taking the configuration over from Project Server to Project Online is probably in the overall migration process, it's the easiest part of all. So in terms of a best practice, identify the content elements that you're going to be taking over, decide what requires cleaning before you move. Do a priority in terms of what you're going to be taking over to your new Project Online from Project Server. Really, it's a matter of being very practical. Unless there's regulatory or compliance requirements, you want to select less content rather than more, because it's less time and less risk that you're taking into Project Online, and you want to have that PPM Project Online experience, to be successful from the get-go. Understand the boundaries, as I said, identify what's not supported, and develop the mitigation plan, and then identify post-migration activities. So, just because we migrate doesn't mean that we can continue to improve through change management of the system, and the migration process gets you started in that change management activity in Project Online. One important step is migration to Project Online gives an organization the opportunity to improve the configuration. So what that means is what you want to do is define how you're actually going to make that improvement, when you're going to have that improvement take place. You can clean up and change the source PWA before migrating to the target PWA, and that's one option. The other is to do it after the migration. And here I'm specifically referring to changing custom fields, for instance, or lookup tables, changing process, changing workflow. What you want to do is not do those changes during the migration. In other words, let's take content and place it into a completely changed configuration. You're going to have data integrity issues. You could have delays because you're now all of a sudden you have to do bulk edit changes to all projects because there's new custom fields. So you'll be disrupting the prescribed sequence for completing a migration of Project Online. So either do it before and then migrate, or migrate and then do it afterwards. That would be that's the recommended approach in order to minimize risk during the migration. I'm showing here our standard migration approach and flow, and basically what we're talking about planning and understanding the content to be migrated, doing a test migration and verifying. And again, give yourself the luxury to do that, so in the production migration you don't encounter issues. Go through and then do a production migration, and there's always a question we always get is, when you do a production migration, when do you actually have a blackout window? And you plan for that, and you make that happen at the very end of your production migration, where you actually might have to re-migrate projects that you started during the initial part of your production migration that went through changes. All of this can be managed in a migration project plan, so it's not really a big deal. We haven't, really faced any major issues in having, a very long blackout window that's longer than, a weekend or, a day or two, where a system might not be available. But it is something that you have to take into account, because with large sets of projects, it might take you a week or longer to do that production migration. The second thing I want to state is that second step usually takes less time, because you've already gone through the test migration, so you know the issues that you encounter, and it's going to go much quicker because you already resolved what those issues are. So that's another reason why you want to do a test migration. You're going to end up spending less time in your production migration if you've done a proper test migration. So here we talk about the best practice of building a migration project schedule. So this is part of what is delivered as part of using FluentBooks, which is a primary tool for doing the migration. Again, migrate a few projects from source to the target even before a test migration, just to see the performance that you're going to encounter with your in your tenant in your test PWA. Understand what the timing is. It's not only about the project plans, but it's also about your latency and your network conditions, the VMs that you might have running. So understanding in your specific environment what that means allows you to create a proper project schedule. After you do that, you can, and gone through the steps of assessment that I talked about earlier, you're going to do a test migration. You're going to be able to then define more accurately how long the production migration is going to take. After validation, you can see that the schedule actually includes UAT in test as well as in production. So you can go into your production migration with high confidence of how long the production migration is actually going to take, and then you can go complete your production migration and then do your cutover and release to your users. So why does it take so long? This is a question we get a lot of times, and it really depends on the amount of data and the limitations on the upload on the API. So you know, in a small migration, we could be talking about 10 minutes per project, and we put some assumptions there about the sizing. And that is, by the way, in terms of upload, we haven't talked about download, and we haven't talked about moving the project site. So this is just one task out of all the content that we mention in terms of the content that we have to manage. So you know, if very simple, if you have a smaller set of projects, smaller set of tasks, smaller set of assignments, and a narrower configuration, you're going to end up, you know, requiring less time to upload the projects. If you convert that to, you know, a much more evolved configuration with a lot more assignments and tasks, you're going to end up having, you know, a much longer migration, and this expands, you know, exponentially as you increase projects and increase users and assignments. So, you know, that's why, you know, upfront planning and those test migrations and assessments is really important. So you're not caught off guard in terms of how long the migration is actually going to take. So, you know, again, we're just dealing here with the constraints of the API. You can have parallel uploads with multiple accounts, but you really can't go above 10. After that, there's concept of throttling that comes into play, and literally the ability to upload data shuts down on you. So you have to, you know, manage that also accordingly to make sure that you don't face that issue. It is real, and it can limit your the speed of your migration. So for doing a migration, for those of you that haven't seen FluentBooks before, it's basically a desktop tool that creates what's called a workspace, which is a container of a project server configuration and SharePoint data. And you're basically bringing it down or downloading it from your source PWA, and then in FluentBooks there's different wizards and controls that allow you then to decide what you want to take to the target PWA. So you don't necessarily need to take everything that you download. There's selection dialogues that allow you to control what it is that you want to take to your target PWA. So there's a source. In the case of a project server on-premise, you know, that will be the source, and then your target is going to be your project online PWA, whether it's test or production. If you're talking about a tenant-to-tenant migration, then, you know, you're talking about a source tenant going to a target tenant. So you're using FluentBooks as a client on a VM. Usually there's virtual machines that are created in order to manage the download and upload first of the configuration and then of the actual data. So you will go through the same process if you're talking about projects after you've actually done the configuration. There's a specific sequence, and everyone gets training on how you actually use FluentBooks. You know, there's orientation also for defining the migration strategy, and it's very prescriptive. In other words, you have to follow it in order for everything to go well. Like I said, otherwise you have to start over, which happens to folks sometimes when they forget. The first steps have to do with downloading the configuration and settings, downloading projects and project plan templates. There's publishing also that occurs prior to actually that taking place, and then finally you're going to do your project sites and templates, and then subsequently you're going to do the same thing going upload to the target. You're going to start with the configuration and settings. You go through into doing site templates, project templates, upload verification of your EPTs. There's the project site creation settings, uploading projects and uploading project sites. And point number 3, all the way at the bottom, is really, really important, because in both production and test migrations, you want to make sure that you go through the verification step. There's folks that understate that those activities and end up then seeing all types of strange output in the target PWA, and that's because they did not go through and do verification. If your aim is to have data integrity between your source and your target, and making sure that your project online experience is an excellent one, you want to go through that verification step. Don't sacrifice that step in either test or production. So FluentBooks receives constant updates. So it's a product that has a development team and is actively being used by all the partners, MCS, and basically it's the primary tool for doing migrations to Project Online, and constantly being updated to account for changes that have occurred within Project Online. So it is a valuable tool, and by the way, it's not only for migration but also for change management. So you want to make sure that you leverage after you complete your migration in order to manage the Project Online application lifecycle, and there's also training provided in order for you to leverage the capabilities for change management. We've included in our recent releases a migration sizing questionnaire. So if you are entertaining a migration to Project Online, we do offer this feature at no cost for organizations, again, that are doing migration. Basically, that first assessment step is addressed in part by running the sizing questionnaire. As you can see in the slide, you go from source to target, and the output gives you a very good idea of what you have in your existing project server, and you can then evaluate, develop your migration plan for moving to Project Online. We continue to add capabilities. So this is one additional one where we can actually now migrate groups and users with specific user mapping. So just another example of additional features that are added to the tool through time, and this one is a recent one. We like to highlight just because, again, there's improvements constantly being done to the platform. So to close, if we can summarize from all of our migrations, what you need to take into account, first of all, understand the data that's in your source. And I know that's hard sometimes because we have years of projects in our project servers, but focus on the data that needs to be moved to Project Online, and really be disciplined about that. There's really, archive projects, again, unless you require them for regulatory or compliance reasons, shouldn't be really moved. You can, by the way, create additional PWAs. That's another workaround to accommodate archives. You can create an archive PWA and take those projects to the archive PWA after you do your first release of production data. So that's a strategy that you can employ in order to take into account, those archive projects. Do a lot of planning, have multiple sessions. Believe it or not, getting accounts for external users to go into project server and download can take time. So you want to make sure that you take that into account in your migration plan. Creating the VMs, that are going to have FluentBooks. Again, depends on internally on what your process is for requesting those resources, but you need to take that into account because you absolutely need that in order to get started with your test migrations. Understand your configuration and how you built your project server, because not everything is going to go to Project Online. That's what those technical boundaries are. both in terms of customizations, but in terms of what Project Online allows, and define how you're going to overcome those limitations and workarounds as part of your migration strategy and your migration plan. Provide and allow training of the team that's going to perform the migration. You'd be surprised how everybody sees these presentations and they assume that it's pretty straightforward. That might be the case, but you still have to go through training and how using these tools and these methods apply to your specific scenario. Everyone, while there's definite, repeatable patterns, everyone has unique attributes to the way that they deploy project servers. So you want to make sure that you go through orientation, you go through defining your migration strategy, and you train the team that's going to, be participating in the migration. And then finally, do go through the step of verification, validation of the migrated data. You really want to see on the other side and really get the project managers to look at their projects and the new project online to make sure that the experience is acceptable to them and there are no issues once you do your production migration and your cutover. So I would say that these are 5 points to keep in mind as you're moving forward with your migration to Project Online and defining your strategy. I think now I turn it over to Heather so she can continue with our presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Jose. So before we wrap up, we just have a couple of quick offers that we'd like to extend to each of you. If either looks appealing, please feel free to reach out directly and we'll review your eligibility and next steps to get you started. I also mentioned we'll send out the slides. I've got my contact on the last slide. I realize we don't have Jose's, so I will send that out to each one of you with the presentation as well. But first offer, we have a free PPM health check. One of the questions customers are going to have that are embarking on this journey is, from where they're starting today, what's it going to take to get them taking advantage of the latest technology. So we can not only optimize your current implementation with this health check, we can also help you build a roadmap that makes sense and gives you confidence that it's one that is not only doable, but it's the lowest risk approach for you actually moving forward. The idea there is we can provide outputs like health check scorecards, remediation plans, a deployment roadmap, a total cost of ownership evaluation of moving forward into the new pieces, and then just really putting together a plan so you have a comfort level that you're on a roadmap for success for the long haul. And then secondly, for larger organizations, we're offering a one-on-one migration customer immersion event where we would actually come to your organization and run a migration transformation workshop along with Jose. This workshop would include not only best practices and tips and tricks, but also a migration assessment, a roadmap for migration, as well as a configuration workbook that's based on your current environment, which allows you to see what changes will be necessary prior to migrating online. We can even stand up your current configuration in an online environment so you can get a true test of what your cloud deployment would look like. Again, feel free to contact me directly with further questions. And with that, I think we'll bring this webinar to a close. A special thank you to Jose for co-hosting today. For more information, please visit the website. You can sign up for additional webinars there as well, or email me directly for more information on digital transformation and or migration services. Thanks so much and have a great day.